I'm Brooke, and I just turned 31 last month. What should have been a celebration turned into the most humiliating day of my life. After 5 years of marriage to David, I thought I knew what to expect from his family, especially his mother, Evelyn. But nothing prepared me for opening that beautifully wrapped gift box to find divorce papers nestled inside like a cruel joke. The room went silent as Evelyn's triumphant smile cut through me like a knife. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments, hit like and subscribe, and stick around to hear how my monster-in-law's birthday gift ultimately changed my life in ways I never expected. Before I met David, I had built a life I was proud of. I'd worked hard through nursing school, specializing in pediatrics, because something about helping children always felt right to me. My apartment was small but cozy, decorated with photos of my travels and mementos from friends. I had a tight circle of friends, weekend brunches, and a cat named Whiskers who greeted me at the door each evening. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was content. Everything changed at the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I was there representing the pediatric ward, wearing a navy blue dress I'd splurged on for the occasion. I was chatting with a colleague when I noticed him across the room, tall, with kind eyes and a genuine smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. David Harrington, as I would soon learn, was there representing his architecture firm, which had designed the hospital's new children's wing. "That chandelier is something, isn't it?" he said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, offering me one. I'd like to say I designed it, but I can only take credit for the ceiling that holds it. His self-deprecating humor made me laugh, and we spent the rest of the evening talking. David was passionate about his work, describing how he tried to design spaces that would comfort children during difficult times. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers, and I felt that flutter of possibility. Our relationship progressed quickly. We discovered shared interests in hiking, old movies, and trying out hole-in-the-wall restaurants. David was attentive and thoughtful, bringing me coffee during my overnight shifts and remembering small details about my likes and dislikes. 3 months in, he told me he loved me as we watched the sunrise from a mountain overlook, and I knew I felt the same. When David suggested meeting his family 6 months into our relationship, I was nervous but excited. Family was important to him, and I wanted to make a good impression. His father, Thomas, was a retired judge, stern but fair, with a dry wit that appeared when you least expected it. His younger sister, Lauren, was studying marine biology and shared my love of true crime podcasts. And then there was Evelyn. At first glance, Evelyn Harrington was the picture of elegance, perfectly coiffed silver blonde hair, tailored clothes, and a home straight out of an interior design magazine. She welcomed me with a hug that felt just a beat too long and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So you're the nurse who's caught my David's attention," she said, looking me over. I always pictured him with someone from our country club circle, perhaps in a more prestigious profession. But there's something refreshing about your simplicity. I felt the sting but brushed it off as first meeting awkwardness. David squeezed my hand reassuringly, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. Throughout dinner, Evelyn peppered me with questions about my family background, subtly highlighting the differences between my middle-class upbringing and their old money status. When I mentioned my parents' divorce, she clicked her tongue sympathetically while saying, "Well, I suppose that explains your independent streak." Despite these undercurrents, the evening ended pleasantly enough, with Thomas inviting me to come back soon and Lauren insisting we exchange numbers. In the car ride home, David was beaming. "They loved you," he said confidently. I didn't have the heart to express my reservations about his mother. 8 months into our relationship, on a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin, David proposed with his grandmother's emerald ring. In that moment of joy and surprise, thoughts of Evelyn's subtle disapproval were far from my mind. I said yes without hesitation, already envisioning our future together. Wedding planning should have been my first serious warning. Evelyn insisted on being involved in every decision, from the venue to the napkin colors. When I selected a simple, elegant dress that fit my budget, Evelyn arranged a surprise appointment at an exclusive bridal boutique, presenting me with a massive ball gown that was entirely not my style. David comes from a certain background, dear, she explained when I expressed hesitation. We need to make sure you look the part of a Harrington bride. I stood my ground on the dress, but gave in on countless other details to keep the peace. David, increasingly busy with a major project at work, seemed oblivious to the tension, or perhaps deliberately avoided it. My best friend Melissa noticed, though. Are you sure about this? She asked over coffee, 3 months before the wedding. His mom is treating you like an accessory, not a person. It's just wedding stress, I assured her, and maybe myself. Once we're married, things will settle down. David's worth it. Our wedding day arrived, a perfect June afternoon with clear skies. Despite Evelyn's last-minute attempts to change the floral arrangements and seating chart, everything came together beautifully. As my father walked me down the aisle toward David, his face lit up with such love that all my doubts melted away. This was right. This was forever. The reception was magical until I overheard Evelyn in conversation with one of her friends. The ceremony was lovely, despite the unconventional choices. We'll work on refining her over time. I pretended not to hear, refusing to let anything dim the joy of the day. After a honeymoon in Greece, we moved into a charming craftsman home not far from the hospital where I worked. Those first weeks of marriage were a delicious blur of newlywed bliss, christening every room of the house, learning each other's routines, and planning our future. We talked about starting a family within a year or two, renovating the spare bedroom into a nursery, and hosting our first Christmas as a married couple. I've never been happier, David whispered one night as we lay tangled in sheets, the moonlight casting patterns on our bedroom wall. You're everything I've ever wanted. I believed him completely, pushing away the nagging voice that wondered if Evelyn would ever truly accept me as part of the family. This was our time, our beginning, and nothing could tarnish the hope I felt for our future together. The first year of our marriage had all the hallmarks of newlywed bliss: weekend brunches in bed, spontaneous date nights, and the exciting process of blending our lives together. We established traditions like Sunday hikes and Thursday movie nights. David would leave little notes in my lunch bag when I had early hospital shifts, and I'd surprise him with his favorite desserts after stressful work days. To outsiders, we were the perfect couple. But subtle shifts began around our 6-month anniversary. David's architecture firm took on a prestigious project designing a new art center, which meant longer hours and weekend work. I supported his career, of course, but the empty space in our bed grew more noticeable with each passing week. It's just temporary, he'd assure me, kissing my forehead distractedly as he checked his emails at the breakfast table. Once we get through the design phase, things will calm down. What didn't calm down were Evelyn's visits. She developed a habit of dropping by unannounced, always with some thin pretext, bringing us leftovers from her dinner party, delivering catalogs for patio furniture we didn't ask for, or simply being in the neighborhood. Somehow, these visits often coincided with David's absences. "Oh, is David working late again?" she'd ask with feigned surprise, though I suspected she timed her visits intentionally. Well, this gives us girl time. I should show you how to properly organize these kitchen cabinets. After the 3rd week of these intrusions, I tried establishing some boundaries. Evelyn, we appreciate your visits, but it would be helpful if you could call before coming over, I suggested gently. Sometimes I'm resting after night shifts or have made other plans. Her face hardened momentarily before melting into a concerned smile. I didn't realize I needed an appointment to see my son and his wife. Family has always been welcome in our home anytime. But I suppose you were raised differently. That evening, I mentioned the conversation to David, hoping for support. Instead, he frowned. Mom's just trying to be close to us, Brooke. She's been alone since Dad started that consulting gig in Boston. Can you just be a little more flexible? It was the first time I felt that sinking realization that in conflicts between his mother and me, David might not automatically take my side. I let the matter drop, but the precedent was set. As months passed, family gatherings became increasingly tense affairs. At Sunday dinners at the Harrington home, Evelyn would subtly exclude me from conversations, referencing shared memories or family friends I didn't know. When I tried to contribute, she'd talk over me or redirect the discussion. David, eager to please his mother, rarely noticed or intervened. Around our first anniversary, I received a promotion to charge nurse of the pediatric oncology unit, a position I'd worked toward for years. When I shared the news at dinner, Thomas and Lauren offered genuine congratulations. Evelyn's response was cutting. "Well, isn't that nice?" she said with a tight smile. Though I've always thought it peculiar when women pursue demanding careers when they should be focusing on starting a family. Don't you think, David? David, caught between us, mumbled something non-committal about being proud of me while avoiding eye contact. The family comment hit a particularly raw nerve because we had started trying for a baby around our anniversary. 6 months in with no success, I was beginning to worry. When my gynecologist suggested some preliminary fertility tests for both of us, Evelyn somehow found out, undoubtedly through David. "I heard about your difficulties," she said during one uninvited visit, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The Harrington men have always been virile, so I'm sure the issue isn't with David. Perhaps all those years of birth control have caught up with you." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood, reminding myself that engaging would only make things worse. But that night, I broke down in tears while talking to my best friend Melissa over the phone. "She's undermining me at every turn, Mel," I sobbed. "And David doesn't see it, or doesn't want to see it." "Have you been completely honest with him about how bad it's gotten?" Melissa asked. I tried that night. When David came home, I calmly explained how hurt I felt by his mother's comments and behavior, giving concrete examples. "You're being oversensitive," he said, loosening his tie with a sigh. "Mom can be blunt, but she means well. Besides, she's going through a lot with Dad being away so much. We need to be understanding." "What about understanding how I feel?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm your wife, David." "And she's my mother," he replied, as if that settled everything. "She raised me alone after my grandfather died. We've always been close. You knew that when you married me." I began to realize there was a pattern forming. When David and I were alone, things were generally good between us. But Evelyn was an invisible third party in our marriage, her influence manifesting in David's reactions, priorities, and the growing distance between us. The holiday season of our second year brought new tensions. I had always loved Christmas and wanted to host dinner at our home, establishing our own traditions. Evelyn was horrified by the suggestion. "Christmas has always been at the family home," she insisted. "David's grandparents hosted, then Thomas and I, and someday, when David inherits the house, you'll host there. That's how it's done." When David sided with his mother, I suggested a compromise: Christmas Eve at our house, Christmas Day at hers. Even this was deemed unacceptable. I ultimately gave in, spending Christmas Day watching Evelyn criticize everything from my contribution to the meal, store-bought pie crust, how pragmatic, to my gift selections. The following spring, I discovered something disturbing. Looking for a document in David's home office, I found printed emails between him and his mother discussing our marriage, including private details about our fertility struggles and arguments. In one exchange, Evelyn wrote, "I've always felt Brooke isn't quite right for you, darling. The nursing career is admirable, but she lacks the social graces and background a Harrington spouse should have. Remember Cousin Philip's divorce? Sometimes it's better to admit a mistake early." David's response wasn't a defense of me, but a plea for patience. "I know you have concerns, Mom, but I love Brooke. Give her time to adjust to our family's ways." I felt physically ill reading their words, this betrayal of my privacy and trust. When I confronted David that evening, showing him the printed emails, he was angry, not at his mother, but at me for snooping. "Those were private conversations," he said, gathering the papers defensively. "About me?" I replied, incredulous. "You're discussing our fertility issues with your mother and letting her suggest I'm not good enough for you. How could you?" "You're taking things out of context," he insisted. "Mom's protective, that's all. She'll come around eventually." But as our second anniversary approached, it was clear Evelyn had no intention of coming around. Instead, her campaign against me intensified. My favorite vase, a wedding gift from my aunt, was accidentally knocked over during one of her visits. My framed nursing diploma mysteriously fell from the wall, its glass shattered. Little things went missing from my closet or appeared stained after Evelyn offered to help with the laundry. By our 3rd year of marriage, the toll was becoming visible. I'd lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself constantly on edge. Work became my sanctuary, the one place where I felt competent and valued. At home, I walked on eggshells, never knowing when David would relay something to his mother or when she would appear at our door. When I suggested marriage counseling, David scoffed. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to communicate," he said dismissively. "All couples go through adjustments. You're making mountains out of molehills." But they weren't molehills to me. They were mountains, growing higher and steeper with each passing day. As we entered our 3rd year of marriage, the distance between David and me expanded like a slow-growing crack in a foundation. The vibrant, attentive man I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by someone who seemed perpetually distracted, irritable, and defensive. His work hours stretched longer, with late nights at the office becoming the norm rather than the exception. "The Thompson project is at a critical phase," he'd explain, loosening his tie as he walked in at 10 p.m. Or, the clients had last-minute changes to the design. There was always a reason, always a project, always something that kept him away from home and from dealing with our deteriorating relationship. One evening in April, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. Checking our shared calendar to plan a weekend away, a desperate attempt to reconnect, I noticed David had a recurring weekly appointment labeled simply "Eat Dinner." The pieces clicked into place. Those weren't late work nights at all. He was having weekly dinners with Evelyn, deliberately keeping them secret from me. When confronted, David didn't even attempt to deny it. "Mom needs the company with Dad traveling so much," he explained, as if this justified the deception. "I knew you'd make a big deal about it, so I didn't mention it." "It's not the dinners, David, it's the lying," I said, my voice shaking. "What else aren't you telling me?" His silence was more damning than any answer could have been. The next morning, I found a small, ornate silver picture frame on our mantel, one I'd never seen before. It held a photo of David and his ex-girlfriend from college at some formal event, both looking young and carefree. When David came home, I held it up questioningly. "Oh, Mom brought that over yesterday," he said casually. "She was going through old photos and thought I might want it." "And you didn't think it was inappropriate to display a picture of you and your ex in our home?" I asked incredulously. David rolled his eyes. "It's just a photo from years ago, Brooke. Why are you always looking for reasons to be upset with my mother?" This pattern repeated with alarming frequency. My grandmother's quilt, carefully stored in our guest room closet, was accidentally used by Evelyn to wrap china, resulting in wine stains that wouldn't come out. My carefully tended garden was helpfully weeded by Evelyn during one of her visits, destroying rare herbs I'd been nurturing for months. Each incident was met with David's dismissal of my feelings and defense of his mother's intentions. In June, I found something truly disturbing. While cleaning out our spare room closet, I discovered a box of items Evelyn had apparently been systematically taking from our home. My favorite sweater I thought I'd lost, family recipes my mother had written out for me, even pages from my personal journal. When I showed David, his face went pale, but instead of outrage, he offered excuses. "She probably thought these things were being discarded," he suggested weakly. "Or maybe she borrowed them and forgot to return them." "Pages from my journal, David?" That she had to search for and deliberately tear out. He had no answer for that, but neither did he confront his mother. Instead, he withdrew further, spending more time at work and with his family, without me. Arguments became our primary form of communication. What started as disagreements about Evelyn evolved into fights about everything: money, household chores, future plans. The loving touches and thoughtful gestures that had once defined our relationship disappeared entirely. By summer, I was desperate enough to schedule a marriage counseling appointment on my own, hoping David would join me once it was arranged. The evening I planned to tell him, He came home with news that his mother had organized a family weekend at their lake house. I told her we'd be there, he said, not asking but informing me. It'll be good for us to get away. I've made an appointment with a marriage counselor for that Saturday, I replied. I think that would be better for us. His face hardened. Cancel it. My family is expecting us. Your family or your mother? I asked, feeling something break inside me. They're one and the same, Brooke. The sooner you accept that, the happier we'll all be. I went to the counseling appointment alone, pouring out my story to a sympathetic therapist named Dr. Mitchell. She listened carefully before speaking. What you're describing sounds like a form of emotional abuse, she said gently. Not just from your mother-in-law, but from your husband's enabling of her behavior and dismissal of your feelings. The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd always associated abuse with shouting and violence, not this slow erosion of self-worth and reality. But as Dr. Mitchell helped me examine the patterns in my marriage, I couldn't deny the truth of her assessment. I continued seeing Dr. Mitchell secretly, paying in cash to keep the appointments off our insurance statements. These sessions became my lifeline as home life deteriorated further. In September, we attended a family gathering for Thomas's birthday. I made a special effort to look nice and stay positive, hoping to mend some fences. Within minutes of arriving, I realized I'd been deliberately excluded from the event planning. Everyone had coordinated in wearing Thomas's favorite color, navy blue, everyone except me, because no one had told me. As I stood there in my green dress amid a sea of navy, Evelyn's smile was that of a chess player who'd just called checkmate. Oh dear, she said loudly enough for nearby relatives to hear. I could have sworn I mentioned the color theme to you, Brooke. How uncomfortable this must be for you. Throughout the evening, I was subtly but consistently excluded. Family photos were arranged while I was in the restroom. Conversations halted awkwardly when I approached. Seating at dinner placed me at the far end of the table, away from David, who didn't seem to notice or care. Lauren, David's sister, found me alone on the porch later. I'm sorry about all this, she said quietly. It's not right how they're treating you. Why does she hate me so much? I asked, tears threatening despite my best efforts. Lauren sighed. It's not about you specifically. Mom's always been like this with anyone who takes attention away from her. David's ex before you got the same treatment until she finally gave up. Mom wants to be the most important woman in David's life, and anyone who threatens that becomes the enemy. The insight was both illuminating and devastating. This wasn't a battle I could win through kindness or perseverance. In Evelyn's eyes, my very existence as David's wife made me her adversary. The drive home that night was silent until I finally asked, "Did you notice how your family treated me tonight?" David kept his eyes on the road. "You're being paranoid again. Everyone was perfectly nice. I was deliberately excluded from family photos. The color coordination. The seating arrangement. Your mother orchestrated all of it." "Jesus, Brooke, not everything is about you," he snapped. "It was Dad's birthday. Can you think about someone else for once?" His words cut deep, inverting reality in a way that made me question my own perceptions. Was I being selfish? Paranoid? Overly sensitive? The doubt crept in like poison. When we arrived home, I discovered a text from David to his mother that he'd accidentally left open on his iPad. "Rough drive home. Be making drama as usual. Sorry about dinner." Seeing those words, confirmation that my husband was actively participating in his mother's campaign against me rather than merely enabling it, something broke inside me. The insomnia that had plagued me for months worsened to the point that I was functioning on 2 or 3 hours of sleep. I lost more weight. Colleagues at the hospital began asking if I was ill. Melissa, who had witnessed my deterioration with growing alarm, finally intervened one evening when I canceled our plans because I was too exhausted to leave the house. "This isn't you, Brooke," she said, letting herself in with the spare key she'd always had. "You're wasting away in front of my eyes." "I'm fine," I insisted weakly. "Just tired." "When was the last time you felt happy? Truly happy?" I couldn't remember. "He's killing your spirit," Melissa said bluntly. "And you're letting it happen." Her words hung in the air between us, uncomfortable but undeniable. That night, I tried one last time to reach David, laying my heart bare in a way I hadn't attempted in months. "I'm drowning, David," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I love you, but I can't keep living like this. Something has to change." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, concern crossing his features, his hand reaching for mine. Then his phone buzzed with a text. Glancing at it, his expression hardened again. "You're not being fair to my mother," he said. "She's trying her best with you." In that moment, I knew we were beyond saving. The man I loved was gone, if he had ever truly existed apart from his mother's influence. What remained was the painful process of accepting that truth and deciding what to do about it. As my 31st birthday approached in October, I was holding onto our marriage by my fingernails, unsure whether I was fighting to save something precious or simply afraid to admit defeat. October in New England has always been my favorite time of year. The crisp air, the explosion of color in the trees, the comforting scent of wood smoke and apples. My birthday falls in the middle of the month, and despite everything that had been happening in our marriage, I allowed myself a small bubble of hope that this year might be different. In the weeks leading up to my birthday, David seemed to soften slightly. He came home earlier a few nights, asked about my day, even brought flowers one evening, yellow roses that reminded me of our courtship. I began to wonder if he was finally recognizing how far we'd drifted and was making an effort to reconnect. "Any special plans for your birthday?" he asked casually over breakfast, 5 days before the actual date. My heart lifted. "I thought maybe we could go to that new Italian place in town? Just the two of us." David nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Leave it to me. I'll take care of everything." For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of excitement. Maybe this could be a turning point for us, a chance to remember why we'd fallen in love, away from Evelyn's influence. The morning of my birthday, I woke to find David already gone, but a card propped against the coffee maker. "Happy birthday, Brooke. I have a surprise planned for tonight. Dress nicely and be ready at 7. Love, David." Despite everything, those simple words rekindled hope. I spent extra time getting ready after my shift at the hospital, choosing a forest green dress that David had once said brought out the gold flecks in my eyes. I styled my hair in loose waves, applied makeup more carefully than I had in months, even dug out the perfume I'd worn on our first date. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself, not because of the dress or makeup, but because I glimpsed something I hadn't seen in a long time: expectation. Hope. David arrived home precisely at 6:30, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit and carrying a small gift bag. "You look beautiful," he said, and for a moment, it felt like old times. He handed me the bag. "A little something to open now." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a nurse's caduceus. "I know things have been difficult lately," David said as he fastened it around my wrist. "But I want you to know I'm proud of you and the work you do." Tears pricked at my eyes. This was the David I'd married, thoughtful, attentive, seeing me. "Ready for your surprise?" he asked, offering his arm. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We drove in comfortable silence, his hand occasionally squeezing mine. When we turned onto the familiar road leading to his parents' neighborhood, however, my stomach knotted. "We're going to your parents' house?" I asked, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. "Just for a quick stop before dinner," David assured me. "Mom wanted to wish you happy birthday in person." It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but I determined to maintain a positive attitude. Perhaps this was David's way of showing that he wanted harmony between the women in his life. I could manage one brief, civil interaction with Evelyn for the sake of the evening ahead. As we pulled into the circular driveway of the Harrington home, I noticed several other cars parked there. "Is someone else visiting your parents?" David smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." Leading me to the front door, he paused before opening it. "Happy birthday, Brooke," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek before pushing the door open. Surprise, a chorus of voices called out as we entered. The foyer and living room were filled with people: David's parents, his sister Lauren, aunts, uncles, cousins, and several neighbors I recognized from previous family gatherings. A banner reading, "Happy 31st Birthday, Brooke," hung across the fireplace mantel. The dining table was set with Evelyn's finest china and crystal, a three-tiered cake at its center. My first reaction was genuine surprise, followed quickly by confusion. This wasn't the intimate dinner I'd imagined, but a family party at Evelyn's house, planned by Evelyn, without any input from me. "Were you surprised?" David asked eagerly, his arm around my waist. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Looking around the room, I noticed something odd. Several family members seemed uncomfortable, exchanging glances or suddenly becoming very interested in their drinks. The atmosphere felt strangely tense for a birthday celebration. Evelyn approached, immaculate as always in a tailored navy dress, her smile tight and triumphant. "Happy birthday, dear," she said, kissing both my cheeks. "I hope you don't mind that we arranged a little gathering. Family should be together for important occasions, don't you think?" Before I could respond, she was guiding me into the living room, where Thomas offered me a glass of champagne with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was that pity in his eyes? For the next half hour, I moved through the room in a daze, accepting birthday wishes from people who had largely ignored or tolerated me at previous family gatherings. Lauren hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry," before quickly moving away when Evelyn approached. "Sorry for what?" The question echoed in my mind as I noticed more oddities: the absence of any of my friends or family members, the hushed conversations that halted when I neared, the way David seemed to be avoiding meeting my eyes. Finally, Evelyn called for everyone's attention by tapping a spoon against her crystal glass. "Before we have cake, David and I have a special gift for Brooke," she announced. "David, would you like to do the honors?" My husband moved to stand beside his mother, accepting a beautifully wrapped box tied with an elaborate silver bow. The room fell silent as he approached me, his expression unreadable. "Happy birthday," he said quietly, placing the box in my hands. Something about the weight of it, the expectant hush in the room, sent warning signals through my body. With trembling fingers, I untied the bow and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, lay a stack of legal documents. Confusion gave way to disbelief as I read the heading on the top page: "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." Divorce papers. On my birthday. In front of David's entire family. I looked up at David, certain this must be some terrible mistake or cruel joke. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his posture resigned. "What is this?" I whispered, though I knew exactly what it was. Evelyn stepped forward, placing her hand on David's arm possessively. "David has been trying to find the right time to tell you, but these situations are never easy. We thought it would be kinder to have family present for support." "Kinder?" The word escaped as a strangled sound. "The marriage isn't working, Brooke," David finally said, still not meeting my gaze. "I think we both know that. And you decided to tell me this way? On my birthday? In front of your entire family?" Each question rose in volume until I was nearly shouting. Evelyn's voice cut through my shock. "Now, dear, there's no need for a scene. The papers are quite generous. David is offering the condo and a fair settlement. We've engaged the best divorce attorney in Boston to ensure everything proceeds smoothly." I repeated, suddenly understanding. "You've been planning this together?" "Mother has been very supportive during this difficult decision," David said, finally looking at me with a mixture of defiance and what appeared to be relief. "I'm sure this comes as a shock," Evelyn continued, addressing the room as much as me, "but David has realized this match was, how shall I put it, not quite right from the beginning. You're from such different worlds, after all. The stress has been affecting his work, his health. As his mother, I couldn't stand by and watch him suffer any longer." The room spun around me as the full impact of the humiliation hit. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or even a private marital matter. This was a calculated public execution of our marriage, orchestrated by Evelyn with David's willing participation. "You've never been happy with our family, Brooke," Evelyn continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Always finding fault, always feeling excluded. Perhaps this is for the best, before children complicate matters." The Harrington name carries certain expectations, certain responsibilities that not everyone is equipped to handle. Something inside me shattered. 3 years of gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional abuse crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I looked around the room at the faces of people who had allowed this to happen, some uncomfortable, some curious, none intervening. "You planned this," I said, my voice eerily calm as I addressed Evelyn directly. "You orchestrated this entire spectacle. What kind of person does this to another human being?" "I'm only protecting my son," she replied, mask slipping to reveal a flash of the true malice beneath. I turned to David, waiting for him to defend me, to say this had gone too far. Instead, he moved to stand closer to his mother. "The papers need to be signed within 30 days, he said mechanically. "My lawyer will contact yours." In that moment, I understood that the man I thought I'd married had never truly existed. He was an extension of his mother, a puppet whose strings I had foolishly thought could be cut. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. 3 years, I said, looking from David to Evelyn. 3 years of my life trying to be good enough for a family that decided I was unworthy before they even knew me. I pulled my phone from my purse and sent a text with shaking fingers. "Enjoy your party," I said, placing the divorce papers back in the box and setting it on the coffee table. "I believe this belongs to you, Evelyn." "It always has." As I moved toward the door, Lauren stepped forward. "Brooke, wait." "It's okay, Lauren," I said quietly. "At least now I know." I walked out into the crisp October night, tears finally streaming down my face as the full weight of the betrayal hit me. Within minutes, Melissa's car pulled up. My emergency text had brought her running. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Get in," she said, throwing the passenger door open. "Whatever happened in there, we'll deal with it together." As we drove away from the Harrington house, I watched the gathered silhouettes in the window grow smaller in the side mirror. 3 years of my life, reduced to a cruel spectacle orchestrated by a woman who had hated me from the beginning and enabled by the man who had vowed to love me above all others. The divorce papers were merely the formal documentation of a marriage that had been dying by 1,000 cuts since the day it began. The days following what I came to call the birthday ambush passed in a blur of shock, rage, and overwhelming grief. Melissa insisted I stay with her rather than return to the home I'd shared with David. "You're not going back there alone," she said firmly as she helped me pack essentials while David was still at his parents' house. I moved through these actions like a sleepwalker, mechanically gathering clothes, toiletries, and important documents. When I reached for my grandmother's quilt, already stained by Evelyn's accident, but still precious to me, something broke through the numbness. "She planned this for a long time," I said, tracing the pattern of the quilt with trembling fingers. "All those accidents with my things, all those comments, she was systematically destroying everything that mattered to me." Melissa nodded grimly. "And David let her." That was the hardest truth to accept, not Evelyn's cruelty, which I'd experienced firsthand for years, but David's betrayal. The man who had promised to be my partner had instead been my adversary, working with his mother to orchestrate my humiliation. 2 days after the party, I received an email from David's attorney, a clinical message detailing the division of assets proposed in the divorce papers I'd left behind. The tone was coldly efficient, as if we were dissolving a business partnership rather than a marriage. The email mentioned that David had already moved the remainder of his belongings out of our home and asked when they could arrange for me to collect the rest of mine. When I didn't respond immediately, David texted, "The sooner we handle this, the better for everyone. Mom knows a realtor who can list the condo." Of course she did. Of course she was already involved in dismantling what remained of our life together. I forwarded the email to a divorce attorney Melissa had recommended and tried to focus on practical matters, setting up mail forwarding, notifying the hospital of my temporary address change, opening a separate bank account. These tasks gave me something concrete to do, a way to feel like I was taking control when everything else was spinning apart. But the nights were unbearable. Lying awake in Melissa's guest room, I replayed moments from our marriage, searching for signs I'd missed, wondering how long David had been planning to leave. Had he ever loved me at all? Had anything been real? The following Monday, I forced myself to return to work, desperate for the normalcy of my routine at the hospital. I'd taken only 3 days off, unable to bear being alone with my thoughts any longer. My colleagues knew something was wrong. The weight loss and dark circles under my eyes told their own story, but most respected my privacy. Dr. Winters, the pediatric department head, called me into her office midway through my shift. "Brooke, I'm concerned," she said gently. "You don't seem like yourself." The simple kindness in her voice nearly undid me. I managed to explain that my marriage had ended suddenly, and I was dealing with the fallout. "Take medical leave," she suggested. "You have weeks of unused time. The children here need you at your best, and right now you need to focus on healing." I wanted to protest that work was the only thing keeping me functional, but the truth was I wasn't functioning. I'd almost administered the wrong dosage of medication earlier that day, catching myself at the last moment. Dr. Winters was right. I wasn't safe to practice nursing in my current state. The medical leave began a darker period. Without work to structure my days, I sank deeper into depression. I barely ate, slept in fragmented bursts plagued by nightmares, and found myself unable to make even simple decisions. Melissa and a few loyal friends tried to help, but I withdrew from most contact, ashamed of how thoroughly I'd been deceived and discarded. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings moved forward with brutal efficiency. David had clearly been preparing for months, financial records organized, assets cataloged, legal strategy in place. I learned he'd been gradually moving money to accounts I couldn't access, consulting with attorneys as far back as 6 months earlier. The betrayal had been calculated and comprehensive. 3 weeks after my birthday, I finally mustered the strength to fully move out of our condo. Melissa and 2 other friends helped pack and load a rented truck while I wandered through rooms that no longer felt like mine, saying goodbye to the life I'd thought we were building. In the home office, I found a hidden folder in David's desk containing emails between him and Evelyn dating back to our engagement, hundreds of exchanges discussing me as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to overcome, an outsider who would never truly belong in the Harrington family. In one particularly painful message from just 2 months after our wedding, David had written, "I'm beginning to see what you mean about Brooke. The novelty is wearing off, and the differences in our backgrounds are becoming more apparent." They had been actively plotting against me almost from the beginning. The discovery shattered any remaining illusion that our marriage had ever been what I thought it was. That night, after the move was complete, I hit rock bottom. Alone in my sparse temporary apartment, a month-to-month rental I could barely afford on my savings, I found myself staring at the divorce papers my attorney had forwarded for review. The clinical language reduced 3 years of my life to assets and liabilities, a failed investment to be liquidated. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo from someone at the birthday party, a group shot of the Harringtons taken after I'd left, champagne glasses raised in what appeared to be a celebration. Evelyn stood in the center, one arm around David, her smile triumphant. The anonymous message read only, "Thought you should see this." Something broke inside me. I hurled my phone against the wall, watching it shatter like my life had. For hours, I sat on the bare floor of that empty apartment, sobbing until no more tears would come. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any way forward. The woman I had been, confident, compassionate, full of purpose, seemed to have vanished, replaced by this hollow shell who had been so thoroughly fooled and discarded. In my darkest moment, I considered moving across the country, abandoning my career, disappearing from a life that had revealed itself to be built on lies. What was the point of staying? David had his family's support, their money, their connections. I had been systematically isolated from my own support system during our marriage. The future stretched before me, empty and terrifying. As dawn broke, my doorbell rang. Assuming it was Melissa checking on me, I opened it without looking, only to find Lauren, David's sister, standing there nervously. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," she said quickly, as if afraid I'd slam the door in her face. "But I couldn't. What they did to you was wrong, Brooke." So wrong. I stared at her, unable to process that a Harrington was standing on my doorstep. Can I come in? She asked. When I didn't respond, she continued, I've left home. I couldn't stay there after what Mom and David did. The way they planned it, how they humiliated you. I tried to stop it, but Mom threatened to cut off my tuition if I warned you. Something in her evident distress cut through my numbness. I stepped aside, allowing her in. For the next 2 hours, Lauren revealed the full extent of Evelyn's manipulation, not just of me, but of David, the extended family, even Lauren herself. She described how Evelyn had been intercepting messages between David and me early in our marriage, deleting texts, screening calls when he was at the family home, feeding him carefully crafted narratives about things I'd supposedly said or done. She did the same thing with his college girlfriend, Lauren explained. Anyone David gets close to becomes a threat to her control. And David, he's been conditioned his whole life to prioritize Mom's approval above everything. That doesn't excuse what he did, I said, finding my voice at last. No, Lauren agreed, it doesn't. David is a grown man who made his choices. But I wanted you to know that what happened wasn't because you weren't good enough, Brooke. It was because Evelyn can't stand not being the center of David's world. No woman will ever be good enough for her son, because that would mean she isn't the most important woman in his life anymore. Her words didn't erase the pain, but they offered a perspective I desperately needed. The failure of our marriage wasn't because I was fundamentally unlovable or unworthy. It was because I had married into a dysfunctional system that was designed to reject any outsider. As Lauren was leaving, she handed me a USB drive. Evidence, she said simply. Emails, texts, recordings of Mom planning the divorce announcement. I thought, it might help with your settlement. And maybe help you understand that none of this was your fault. That unexpected act of alliance from the most unlikely source became the pivot point from which I slowly began to climb out of the darkness. Not instantly, not easily, but gradually, like the first tender shoots breaking through soil after a devastating winter. I wasn't alone. And perhaps most importantly, I wasn't crazy. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with our marriage, it had all been real. The validation that my perceptions had been correct all along gave me the first fragile sense of solid ground beneath my feet since the world had collapsed on my birthday. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. The journey ahead would be long and painful, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming myself from the rubble of a marriage that had been designed to fail from its very beginning. The USB drive Lauren had given me contained more than just validation. It was a roadmap back to myself. After a night of fitful sleep, I plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers, uncertain whether I could bear to witness more evidence of David and Evelyn's betrayal. What I found was both devastating and strangely empowering. The drive contained hundreds of files meticulously organized by date, emails between David and Evelyn discussing their plans, voice recordings of phone conversations, even a spreadsheet tracking David's gradual movement of assets in preparation for the divorce. Most damning was a recording from 3 months before my birthday, in which Evelyn laid out her plan for the surprise party. It has to be public, she said, her voice coldly pragmatic. She needs to understand that the entire family stands with you, that she has no allies here. The birthday is perfect timing. She'll be vulnerable, expecting celebration, completely unprepared for rejection. David's voice, hesitant but acquiescent. I don't know, Mom. It seems unnecessarily cruel. Cruel would be continuing the charade of a marriage, Evelyn countered. You've been miserable for years, darling. She's never fit in, never will. The longer you wait, the more entangled you'll become. What if she gets pregnant? Can you imagine trying to co-parent with her? This is a clean break on our terms. Our terms. Not his terms, theirs. Even in ending our marriage, David had surrendered his agency to his mother. With shaking hands, I compiled the most relevant files onto a new drive and called the attorney Melissa had recommended, Diane Santos, a formidable divorce lawyer known for her uncompromising approach. I need to see you today, I said when I reached her office. I have evidence that changes everything. For hours later, I sat across from Diane in her sleek downtown office, watching her expression shift from professional interest to barely concealed outrage as she reviewed the files. "This goes beyond a contentious divorce," she said finally, removing her reading glasses. "What they did to you constitutes emotional abuse and potentially financial fraud. The deliberate concealment of assets, the planned public humiliation." She paused, tapping her pen against the desk. "Brooke, with this evidence, we can pursue a much more aggressive settlement. And frankly, if David and his mother were to face a judge with this material, they'd be eviscerated." For the first time since my birthday, I felt a flicker of something other than despair, a quiet, smoldering anger that felt cleaner, more energizing than the fog of depression. "What do we do?" I asked. Diane outlined a strategy that involved leveraging the evidence without immediately revealing all of it. "We'll let them know we have information that substantially strengthens your position without showing our full hand. Given what I've seen, I suspect David, or more likely Evelyn, will initially push back hard. They'll be confident in their advantage. When they realize you're not rolling over, things will get uglier before they get better." She was right. The initial response from David's attorney to our counteroffer was dismissive, even condescending. They rejected our terms outright, countering with an even less favorable proposal than the original. "They think you're desperate and beaten," Diane observed. "Time to show a card or two." We sent selected emails proving David had concealed assets, along with financial records Lauren had included showing he'd been moving money to private accounts for months before filing. The effect was immediate. Their next communication dropped the condescending tone, and suddenly they were open to good-faith negotiations. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Brooke, it's David. We need to talk." Hearing his voice sent a physical shock through my system, part pain, part rage, part lingering, unwanted longing for the man I'd thought he was. "Any communication should go through our attorneys," I replied, proud of how steady my voice remained. "Please," he said, and I was surprised to hear genuine distress in his tone. 5 minutes. In person. "There are things I need to say to you, not to lawyers." After consulting with Diane, I agreed to meet David at a cafe downtown, public enough to prevent a scene, but with private tables where we could speak without being overheard. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance and exit. When David walked in, I was struck by how haggard he looked, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes and clothing that seemed to hang on his frame. He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly on the table. "You look good," he said awkwardly. I didn't return the pleasantry. 5 minutes, I reminded him. David took a deep breath. "The settlement offers from your attorney, they include things you couldn't know about unless..." His voice trailed off. "Unless I had evidence of your deception?" I finished for him. "Evidence of how you and your mother planned for months to humiliate me on my birthday? Of how you systematically moved assets to accounts I couldn't access? That kind of evidence." His face paled. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know, David. I know everything." He seemed to collapse inward slightly. "What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. 3 weeks earlier, what I'd wanted was my husband back, my marriage intact, the life I thought we were building. Now, looking at the stranger across from me, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. "I want what's fair," I said simply. "I want recognition of my contributions to our marriage and compensation for the deliberate cruelty with which you ended it." "My mother," he began. "Stop," I interrupted, keeping my voice low but intense. "Don't you dare blame your mother. You're a 34-year-old man who chose to deceive his wife, to conspire behind her back, to publicly humiliate her. Those were your choices, David." He stared at me, seemingly at a loss for words. "Your mother is a manipulative, cruel woman," I continued. "But you allowed her to control our marriage from day one. You betrayed my trust in ways I'm still discovering. That's on you, not her." "I did love you," he said quietly, and for a moment I glimpsed genuine pain in his eyes. "In the beginning, I really did. I'd imagined this moment, a confession of lingering feelings, perhaps even regret. In my fantasies, it had mattered. Sitting across from him now, I realized it didn't." "That makes it worse, not better," I replied, gathering my purse and standing. Accept the settlement offer, David. Or the next time we meet will be in court, where everyone will hear exactly how you and your mother operated. Walking away from that cafe, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying, not just from the marriage, but from years of doubting my own perceptions, of trying to earn love from people who had decided long ago that I was unworthy. The following week brought a flurry of activity. David accepted our settlement terms with minimal additional negotiation, likely motivated by fear of what else might be on that USB drive. I returned to work, my medical leave having served its purpose of giving me time to regain my emotional footing. Dr. Winters welcomed me back warmly, and the familiar rhythms of the pediatric ward provided comfort and purpose. With the settlement money, I put a down payment on a small townhouse, the first property I'd ever owned solely in my name. Melissa and a growing circle of friends I'd reconnected with helped me furnish it with pieces that reflected my taste, not compromises made to accommodate David's preferences or Evelyn's critical eye. Each decision I made for myself, from paint colors to furniture placement to how I spent my evenings, felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity that had been systematically suppressed during my marriage. I joined a support group for people recovering from emotionally abusive relationships, where I found both understanding and perspective. The stories others shared helped me recognize patterns I hadn't been able to name before, and sharing my own experience became part of my healing. 6 months after my birthday, I received an unexpected call from Thomas, David's father. "I owe you an apology, Brooke," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I knew what Evelyn was planning, and I did nothing to stop it. "I've been a coward in my own marriage for decades, allowing her behavior toward you and others before you. It was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." His apology couldn't undo the damage, but it offered another piece of validation, another confirmation that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated what had happened to me. Around the same time, Lauren called with news that sent shock waves through what remained of my connection to the Harrington family. "David moved back in with Mom," she said. "The woman he started dating right after your divorce. Mom drove her away too. It took less than 3 months this time." I felt a complex emotion that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like the grim confirmation of a pattern I'd narrowly escaped. "How are you doing?" I asked, more concerned about Lauren than David. "I'm good, actually. Living on my own for the first time, finishing my degree. I've started seeing a therapist to work through." "Well, growing up with Evelyn as a mother. It's helping." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "You deserve better than being caught in her web." As summer approached, I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, rediscovering activities I'd abandoned during my marriage. I took a watercolor class I'd always been interested in, but had never pursued, because Evelyn had once remarked that crafting hobbies are for women without real ambition. I joined a hiking group, reclaiming my love of the outdoors that had gotten lost in the struggle to be the perfect Harrington wife. At one of these hikes, I reconnected with Jake Peterson, a nurse from the orthopedic department who'd occasionally consulted on pediatric cases. We'd always had an easy rapport at work, but now, away from the hospital in the clear mountain air, conversation flowed naturally. He asked thoughtful questions about my life without prying, shared stories of his own divorce years earlier without bitterness, and made me laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" he asked as we reached the trailhead at the end of the hike. "Just as friends," he added quickly. "No pressure." The old Brooke, the one still raw from rejection, still defining herself through David's abandonment, would have declined, too afraid of further hurt. The woman I was becoming paused, considered how I felt in Jake's company, and nodded. "I'd like that," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Coffee led to dinner a few weeks later, dinner to more hikes, more conversations. Jake was patient, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, respecting the boundaries I set as I navigated the unfamiliar territory of opening myself to trust again. One evening, after we'd been seeing each other casually for nearly 2 months, Jake asked the question I'd been dreading. "What happened with your marriage? You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I'd like to understand." Sitting on my porch swing as fireflies blinked in the summer twilight, I found myself telling the whole story, not the sanitized version I shared with colleagues or the bare-bones outline I gave to casual acquaintances, but the raw, unvarnished truth of loving someone who had allowed his mother to destroy our marriage. Jake listened without interrupting, his face reflecting anger, compassion, and occasional disbelief as the story unfolded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said finally. "I can't imagine going through what you did and coming out the other side as whole as you are." "I don't feel whole some days," I admitted. "That's part of what makes you whole," he replied. Recognizing the broken places without letting them define you. In that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer just surviving my divorce. I was beginning to thrive despite it. The woman who had been systematically diminished in her marriage was finding her voice, her strength, her ability to trust her own perceptions again. When David reached out one last time in late summer, a rambling late-night text suggesting he'd made a mistake, that perhaps we could talk about reconciliation, I felt nothing but clarity. This wasn't love or even nostalgia. It was a drowning man reaching for a familiar lifeboat after his mother had sunk his latest relationship. My response was brief: "No. I wish you healing, David, but it won't come from me or your mother. Find the courage to break free and build a life that's truly yours." I didn't wait for his reply. Some chapters are better left firmly closed. As the anniversary of my divorce approached, I realized I'd accomplished something I once thought impossible. I'd rebuilt a life that was authentically mine, filled with people who valued me for exactly who I was. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments when memories ambushed me or when trust felt like a fragile, risky thing. But those moments no longer defined my days or determined my choices. What Evelyn had intended as my destruction had instead become the catalyst for my liberation. In trying to break me, she had inadvertently freed me from a marriage that had been slowly eroding my sense of self from the very beginning. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was becoming a life I cherished, hard-won, authentically mine, and full of possibilities I couldn't have imagined when I was desperately trying to earn the approval of people who had decided long ago that I would never be good enough. 1 year after finding divorce papers in a birthday gift box, I stood in my own kitchen, mixing batter for my own birthday cake. 32 years old, divorced, and making myself a funfetti cake because it was my favorite and no one was around to judge my childish taste. The simple act felt revolutionary. My townhouse had transformed from a sparse shelter into a true home. Walls once bare now displayed watercolors from my painting class, not masterpieces by any measure, but expressions of my journey. Bookshelves held novels Evelyn would have deemed lowbrow entertainment. Throw pillows in mismatched patterns brightened my couch because I liked them, not because they coordinated with some designer's vision. As I slid the cake into the oven, my phone chimed with birthday wishes. Melissa, colleagues from the hospital, friends from my hiking group, my parents, and Lauren, who had become an unexpected but treasured friend. Later that evening, friends would gather for a casual celebration, pizza, cake, and board games. A far cry from the Harrington family's formal dinner parties, and exactly what I wanted. Jake would be there too, our relationship having evolved gradually into something that felt both exciting and comfortable. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. A delivery person handed me a small package and a bouquet of sunflowers. The card with the flowers read simply, "To new beginnings. Jake." The package was from my attorney, Diane. Inside was a copy of my final divorce decree, officially processed and recorded, along with a note, "Officially official. Congratulations on your freedom." I traced my finger over my restored maiden name on the document. Brooke Mitchell, no longer Brooke Harrington. The name change had been one of the most significant parts of reclaiming my identity. Each time I heard Ms. Mitchell at work or signed my name, I felt a little more like myself again. My promotion to senior charge nurse had come through 3 months earlier, recognition of my dedication and skill that had nothing to do with being a Harrington. The pediatric oncology unit had become not just a workplace, but a community where I knew my contributions mattered. The transformation in my professional life had been matched by personal growth. Weekly sessions with Dr. Mitchell had helped me process not just the trauma of my marriage and its ending, but deeper patterns that had made me vulnerable to someone like David in the first place. My tendency to prioritize others' needs above my own. My habit of making myself smaller to avoid conflict. My struggle to trust my own perceptions when they differed from others. Perhaps the most profound change had come through my volunteer work at New Beginnings, a center supporting survivors of domestic abuse. After Lauren had used the word abuse to describe Evelyn's behavior toward me, I'd initially resisted the term. Abuse conjured images of physical violence, not the subtle erosion of self-worth I'd experienced. But my support group had helped me recognize that emotional abuse could be just as devastating, its invisible wounds sometimes taking longer to heal than physical ones. At New Beginnings, I met women whose stories reflected elements of my own: the isolation, the gaslighting, the sense of walking on eggshells around unpredictable anger or criticism. Sharing my experience became a way of transforming pain into purpose. Each time a woman nodded in recognition at something I described, each time I saw the relief in someone's eyes at realizing they weren't crazy or alone, I reclaimed another piece of my story. 3 months ago, I'd encountered David unexpectedly at a hospital fundraiser. He'd been there with his parents, looking uncomfortable and diminished somehow, as if returning to his mother's orbit had reduced him in some essential way. Our eyes had met across the room, and for a moment, I'd felt a complex swirl of emotions: pity, remnants of anger, but mostly a profound sense of distance, as if he belonged to another lifetime. Evelyn had noticed the exchange and swiftly inserted herself between us, guiding David away with a possessive hand on his arm. I'd watched them go, struck by the realization that David was as much Evelyn's victim as I had been, the difference being that he had chosen his cage, while I had fought my way free of mine. The encounter had prompted a conversation with Dr. Mitchell about forgiveness, not the kind that excused what David had done, but the kind that allowed me to release the grip his betrayal had on my heart. Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay, she'd explained. It's about choosing not to let the hurt continue to control your life. I wasn't there yet with Evelyn, perhaps never would be, but I was beginning to find a kind of peace regarding David. He would live with the consequences of his choices, just as I was living with the aftermath of mine. The difference was that my choices had led to growth and freedom, while his had returned him to the familiar patterns of his childhood. As my birthday cake baked, filling the house with a sweet vanilla scent, I opened my laptop to find an email from a literary agent. Months earlier, encouraged by friends in my support group, I'd started blogging about my experience, using the pseudonym Phoenix, a nod to rising from the ashes of my marriage. The blog had resonated with more people than I could have imagined, women and men struggling to understand the dynamics of their own relationships or heal from ones that had ended. The agent had found my blog and was interested in discussing the possibility of a book, a memoir about emotional abuse, gaslighting, and the journey back to self-trust. The idea both terrified and exhilarated me. Could I really transform my pain into something that might help others navigate their own darkness? My doorbell rang again, Jake arriving early to help set up for the party. When I opened the door, his smile warmed me in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. "Happy birthday," he said, stepping inside and kissing me softly. "How does it feel to be 32? "Better than 31, I replied with a laugh that held no bitterness. "So much better than 31. Later, surrounded by friends eating pizza and arguing good-naturedly over board game rules, I found myself observing the scene as if from a slight distance, not detached, but marveling at how different my life had become in just 1 year. These people loved me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. They valued my opinions, respected my boundaries, celebrated my successes without resentment. This was family, not defined by blood or marriage certificates, but by genuine care and mutual respect. When Jake caught my eye across the room and winked, I felt a flutter of possibility. Our relationship was still new, evolving carefully as we both carried lessons from past heartbreaks. I didn't know where it might lead, but I trusted myself to navigate that journey with my eyes open and my worth intact. After my friends had gone home and Jake had left with a lingering kiss and plans to meet for breakfast, I stood on my back porch gazing at the stars. 1 year ago, I'd thought my life was ending. In some ways, it had. The life I'd tried to build with David, the person I'd contorted myself into being to fit the Harrington mold. But from that ending had come this new beginning, messy perhaps, less certain, but authentically mine. The divorce papers Evelyn had so triumphantly presented as my humiliation had become, ironically, my liberation. I thought of something my support group facilitator often said. Sometimes the most painful endings are actually beautiful beginnings in disguise. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined ever seeing beauty in what had happened to me. Now, I recognize the truth in those words. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely follows a neat, linear path. There would still be difficult days, moments when old wounds throbbed or trust felt tenuous. But I had built a foundation of self-knowledge and support that could weather those storms. If you're watching this and struggling with your own painful ending, please know that it doesn't define you. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. The people who try to diminish you reveal their own limitations, not yours. Be gentle with yourself as you heal, and trust that on the other side of pain lies the possibility of a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one you're leaving behind. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. How have you transformed pain into growth? What helped you reclaim your power after loss? Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with anyone who might need to hear that surviving betrayal is possible, even when it comes wrapped as a birthday gift from your mother-in-law. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember that your story isn't over. It's still being written, and you hold the pen. Until next time, this is Brooke Mitchell, wishing you healing, strength, and the courage to begin again.